Tatiana Kamidev can only stare in dumb horror as the old opera house, the place that had been her refuge, her safety, her home, comes crashing down like a house of cards. Where the building had stood, there is only debris and dust, a titanic funeral cairn to the web. The web. Spider. Her family. They were still all inside the opera house when it collapsed, all of them buried under countless tons of timber and rubble. Rubble that even now remains the focus of the web's many, many enemies. Those vampires that have survived pick themselves from the ruins and hurl themselves against the machine cultists surrounding them. The voice of the machine barks out orders to track down and eliminate all and any survivors, and approaching sirens signal the imminent arrival of Bluecoat reinforcements. There is nothing Tatters can do to help, no enemy she can realistically fight. She is like that poor old building, pushed beyond endurance, utterly demolished by an unending series of punishing body blows. Vision blurred with tears of impotent rage, she does the only thing she can. She runs. Hello and welcome to The Lone Adventurer, an actual play solo RPG podcast with me, Carl White. I will be your narrator, your game master, and your guide as we follow our heroes on their journey into the unknown. For this game, I will be using the Chasing Adventure rule set, as well as a variety of other systems, tools, and tables as they take my fancy. A word of warning. The following scenes may contain mature themes and disturbing imagery. Listener discretion is advised. The adventure continues. Last time on The Lone Adventurer, we learned the secrets of Barbican's creation and saw the automaton subsumed by the consciousness of the Doomspire. Whether or not it was the fragment of herself that she had used to bring Barbican to life, the Doomspire avatar spared her life, but revealed a terrible secret. The Doomspires, constructed by the Seven, were responsible for the shattering of the world thousands of years ago. Something, it seems, had prevented the completion of that process. But with the reawakening of this Doomspire, the countdown has begun. When all 7 spires are fully reactivated, the shattering will be completed. The end of the world is nigh. Welcome back, loyal listener. It's been quite a while since I last set foot in the Chained World, 18 months to be precise. Working towards a big change in career left me with no bandwidth to focus on solo gaming and podcasting. But now that change has happened, and I am now a full-time leadership coach, and I find myself equipped once more with time, energy, and motivation. And with that renewed energy has come renewed curiosity. What has happened to our cast of characters? How can they possibly recover from the perilous state in which we left them? We have hung on from the cliff long enough. I mentioned before that I believe games keep us fresh and alert and sharp. They challenge us and they test us. They keep us curious and excited and engaged. They ask us, what comes next? I think it's high time we found out. I said in the Session 0 episode for Series 3 that I'm going to remain open to the possibility that, from time to time, the focus of my story may shift. That other characters may steal the narrative limelight and that other stories may run in parallel to Mina's. And if that does happen, I will even remain open to the possibility of running those parallel story threads using a completely different game system, depending on the nature of those stories. Well, now is the perfect time for one of those shifts. Did I say the cliffhanging had gone on long enough? Well, apologies, but I'm afraid you're going to have to cling on just a little longer to hear Mina's story. But before we abandon her altogether, there is one thing I'd like to cover. I mentioned last episode that I provide some historical and religious context to the work of the Doomspires, and that still holds true. So let's take a brief trip back in time. In the prehistory of this world, myth has it that the Seven, an inscrutable group of 300-metre-tall iron colossi, sang the world into existence. History unfolded, as history has a tendency to, just one damn thing after another. And this went on for millennia, until one fateful day when the mortal races, in their hubris, and during a brief window of not knocking 7 shades of shit out of one another, decided to chain one of the colossi, Droom. Quite why anyone thought this would be a good idea is lost to the winds of time. Perhaps it was believed that by capturing the embodiment of knowledge, all knowledge of the progenitors would be granted to the people of the world. All very Promethean. Or perhaps it was born of a child's desire to prove themselves the equal, even superior, of their parent. Actually, that's fairly Promethean too. Regardless, this went about as well as you might expect. In short order, the colossi fell silent, and then a single note rang out that shattered the world into a score of landmasses floating on the void sea. In the aftermath of this cataclysm, the people of the world scrambled to recover. Chains that had been designed to restrain primordial beings were now repurposed, deployed to hold together the shattered remnants of the world. This, then, is the shared creation story of the chained world. Some things that should not have been forgotten were lost. History became legend, legend became myth, and for 2,500 years the truth of the world's shattering passed out of all knowledge. Isn't it always the way? But Mina has discovered that truth. The Doomspires, constructed, like the Great Machine, by the progenitors, were the tool by which the world was shattered. Something prevented the Doomspires from completing their task, and over thousands of years, the inhabitants of the chained world slowly recovered and rebuilt amidst the ruins. In time, they fell back to their old ways of warring, and empires rose and fell anew. Now, the greatest empire the world has ever seen stands on the brink of a victory that will see all lands united under the Archdominar. But now also, a Doomspire has reawoken and readies itself to complete the task begun thousands of years ago. This is where we shall leave Mina for now, and instead move our attention back to Tatters and the city of Kyras, capital of the Dominion, the Golden City on the Chain. The same Kyras that is presently racked by a civil war that threatens to tear her apart. A city beleaguered by poverty, crime, terrorist atrocities, political intrigue, and religious schism. Why don't we zoom in and see how things are going? Tatters is on the run again. The pump station safehouse had given her brief, precious respite, but a series of nearby explosions and the sound of approaching fighting had told her all she needed to know. The civil war tearing through the city meant there was nowhere safe any longer. She would have to run if she were to survive. Those few hours of calm had at least provided her with the opportunity to calm the tumultuous maelstrom of her thoughts, to push down those feelings of grief, panic, and loss, and take stock. Part of her had been aware that she needed to keep moving forward. If she let herself really process everything she had recently been through, she knew she would probably fall apart. And so she does what she always does. She takes the problem in front of her, piece by piece, and sorts it into what she knows and what she doesn't, what she can control and what she can't. Don't think about the demon, or about how it tore your mind from your body and took it for its own. Don't think about the web, their bodies crushed beneath tons of masonry. Focus instead on what to do next. Just like the spider taught her, she slows her mind, breathes deeply, and turns over what she knows in her mind, sifting through memory like a prospector panning for gold. She examines the madness of the battle dispassionately, and freed from terror, she begins to see it in a new light. What had seemed nothing but chaos, bedlam, and carnage takes on new structure and form. She replays the memories over and over, looking at them from different angles, and the conclusion she reaches startles her. It seems utterly counterintuitive, but the more she studies it, the more convinced she grows. The vampires of the Undying had been fighting alongside the web. That is not to say, of course, that they are necessarily allies. At face value, Lord Tortimus had more reason than most to despise the web. They had, after all, crash-landed his brand-new acquisition, the floating casino, known as the Mustang, into the city. But when she steps back through the battle, and through the conversation that preceded it, she can find no flaw in her reasoning. Tortimus postured, certainly. He used Sallow to gain access to the Opera House, but he never really threatened them. He never attacked them, though he had ample opportunity to kill them all. And, in the battle itself, the vampires fought everyone. Unseen, Enlightenment, machine cultists, everyone, that is, except the web. More than anything right now, she needs allies. If there is a chance that the Third Guild, the Undying, have the same foes as she does, then perhaps there's a chance of finding some protection. Which is why, when the sound of battle grows near and Tatters is forced to flee the safe house, she is no longer running away. When she runs, she knows exactly where she's going. If she's going to find the answers she seeks, she needs to go to the heart of the vampire presence in the city, to Lord Tortimus's base of operations. She's heading for the Mustang. I have a guilty secret when it comes to RPGs. It's the reason I have a whole bookshelf creaking under the weight of 100 and counting RPG books, and it's a secret I think I share with a lot of RPG collectors. Here's the thing, I'm never totally satisfied with the game I'm playing. Put another way, I'm on an endless quest to find my perfect game, a quest that is, I am fully aware, ultimately doomed to failure, and one that will incur a cost that Dr. Faustus would blanch at. A cost, it goes without saying, that I intend to keep carefully obfuscated from my wife. Because, dear listener, as I am sure you're aware, the perfect game, much like the fabled Bandersnatch or the horrible Heffalump, simply does not exist. Does this fact deter me? Does it stem the tide of Kickstarters backed or Heartbreakers embraced? It does not, and part of the reason for that is the joy of discovering the new. Innovations in game design, refinements to existing mechanisms, discovery of systems that match a specific need. In Series 2, Chapter 3, I mentioned a solo campaign I'd once played using the Powered by the Apocalypse game, Dungeon World. I enjoyed the streamlined simplicity of that game immensely, though I could see it was a little creaky in places. That's not so surprising. Dungeon World was one of the very earliest Powered by the Apocalypse games, and in the years since its release, the design of this family of games has evolved. Dungeon World was also built as a Powered by the Apocalypse Dungeons & Dragons analogue, and I think it's fairly generally accepted these days that perhaps it took a little too much of the source game along for the ride. There is talk of developing a second edition of Dungeon World, but as I understand it, that hasn't even reached the stage of assigning a game designer yet, so even assuming it happens, it's likely to be a long way off. That has left the field open for other games to take a stab at the design space, but up until now, none of the ones I've read have really chimed with me. That is, up until Chasing Adventure. Chasing Adventure is a clean and elegant Powered by the Apocalypse game that feels to me like the spiritual successor of Dungeon World, with none of the clunky bits, and all of the benefits of more recent design developments. Up until now, I've not played it, but from my read-through of the rulebook, which I find blessedly easy to read, following the comparative impenetrability of Blades in the Dark, this is exactly the sort of game that I'm looking for. Remember what I said about that endless hunt for the perfect game? Well, here you see it playing out in real time. Will this be the one? Well, of course not, but it will be fun finding that out. As to why I've shifted systems from Starforged to Chasing Adventure, that ties back to finding the right tool for the job. Starforged is great for exploration and travel, which worked for Mina's journey. Now we're revisiting Tatters, and I want a system that is more about action and adventure, and that is what Chasing Adventure purports to be. Early signs from the Magic 8 Ball are good. The first scene was written using a GM move and a player move from Chasing Adventure, and they gave me a straightforward steer as to where the story was going. I'll get into the details of the game mechanics another time, but as usual, if you want to get an idea of how that last scene was built, the details are in the show notes. After so long away from this story, it's taken me some time to get all of the various plot threads straight. Looking back on 2.5 series of content, there is a mind-boggling amount of stuff to remember. To help me build a database of all the characters, factions, NPCs, locations, threads, questions and mysteries, I've used a very handy free tool that Mike Shea, aka the Lazy DM Sly Flourish, has spoken about at length on his podcast. Notion. Notion is an amazing tool for organising content, as well as for session prep, notes, and even character sheets. I use it for my online and in-person games, and now I'm using it for my solo one too. This is not the place to go into detail on what that tool does. Mike has done a far better job than I could ever do, so if you're interested in learning more, I've put a link in the show notes. Suffice to say, I don't think I could have got on top of all that content without a tool like Notion. There's one other tool to mention, but we can come to that later. For now, let's see how Tatters is faring. By the time Tatters reaches the Mercer's Quarter, the military are out in force. Where before the undying and criminal gangs of all stripes had been engaged in a running street battle, if you could call the one-sided slaughter of the Kyras criminal underclass a battle, now the tide has very much turned. She realizes at once that she can't reach her destination on foot. The territory between her and the Mustang is a genuine war zone. Buildings have been turned to smoking rubble. Fires burn out of control and small units of combatants engage in a constant exchange of deadly hit-and-run attacks. The night is torn by the shrieking of magical ordnance, the sky lit up like a festival day by the tracer fire, the strikes and the counter-strikes, the blinding and deafening explosions. The Bluecoats, emboldened by the support of Imperial troops, are taking the Mercer's Quarter back, one street at a time. From her vantage point on Goldsmith Park, hidden behind a shattered stone wall, she sees a squad of Blues out in the open. Vampires close in, sensing easy prey. When they understand the trap they have fallen into, it is far too late. Canisters, fired from hiding, airburst over the park. The Blues are unaffected, but the vampires shriek and thrash in pain as the clouds of gas roll over them. Even from this distance, Tatters catches the unmistakable whiff of garlic. The troops move in, encircling the park, heavy crossbows laying down a devastating hail of fire on the Nightspawn. Vampires fall, withering to dust as bolts slam into them. These are not just any crossbows, Tatters realizes. the bolts they are firing are more like wooden stakes. The Imperial military, it seems, are well prepared for fighting the Undying. This is untenable. If she tries to get through this mess at pace, she's going to run into one side or the other and either get blown up, shot, or have her throat ripped out. If she waits for the fighting to die down, likely as not there'll be nothing left of the vampires, and the Mustang will be crawling with the Dominar's soldiers. Neither option is going to get her the help or the answers she needs. Much as she's been trying to avoid it, she's going to have to use her magic. That's not strictly true, she is forced to admit to herself. It's not her magic exactly, is it? Ever since she made that pact with the demon Satara, what was hers and what was the demon's has been growing ever more blurred. At first, it had been minor things, harmless really.
Let me see through your eyes, just for a moment. Let me hear what you hear, taste what you taste. A single memory of your choice. Is that so much to ask?
How had it gone from there to the demon seizing total control of her body, casting her out of her mind, nearly killing Crater? She shudders at the memory of the foulness of the demon's presence. The demon had granted her power, true enough, but it had taken power in return, and bit by bit, the balance was tipping away from her and into its favour. The more she uses her magic, and the greater the power of that magic she wields, the greater the chance of granting ever more leverage to the demon that rides at her shoulder. The simple solution would be to simply stop, to turn her back on the demon-fueled magic she wields, to cast the demon out and return to nothing more than the simple cantrips she learned as a child. But even as she thinks it, she knows there is no going back to what she was. There's no real choice. Her friends need this power. The city needs this power. Your friends are dead, a voice whispers in her mind, and this city, hell, this whole damned world has nothing for you, nor you for it. You were willing to let Tanth burn, remember? Don't delude yourself, Tatiana. This is for you. All for you. This is your choice. Tatters brushes the thoughts aside. They are nothing but distraction and weakness. These things cannot help her. She needs to focus on her purpose and damn the consequences. There, looming in the distance over shattered rooftops and smoking ruins, lies the broken hulk of the Mustang. She summons her will and feels the familiar, addictive thrill as she connects with the very fabric of the world. Wielding her will like a knife, she opens a tear in reality, connecting it with that distant view of the Mustang. She steps into the writhing, purple chaos that opens before her and vanishes. Let's take a dive into the detail of the mechanics at play so far. I'm using a hybrid virtual GM for this section of the game, a mashup of the mythic card deck and my perchance random event oracle. I've also supplemented my perchance tool with a list of the moves and tough choices laid out in the Chasing Adventure rulebook, so that I can flavour my virtual GM with mechanics specific to this game. I kicked off Scene 1 by imagining Tatters heading back to the safe house to rest and recover. As a GM in Chasing Adventure, you make a move to change the situation when the players look to you to see what happens, or the players ignore a clear threat, or the players roll a 6 or less on most moves, or the PC becomes exposed, vulnerable or similar. This lull in the action seemed like a suitable point to make a Game Master move, and so I used my Perchance Oracle to pick a GM move for me. The answer was set up an immediate danger. According to the rulebook, this is the most common GM soft move in Chasing Adventure. You describe something bad that is about to happen, right here and now, but hasn't happened yet. There is a threat that, left unaddressed, will lead to a bad outcome. I used my perchance oracle to get some guidance on the nature of that threat and got a description of guarded settlement and a link to the plot thread civil war in the city. Tatter's safe house would soon be discovered and overrun. Next, Tatter's made a move of her own, the ponder move. That move states, when you consider what you know about a subject, ask the GM one question about it, say how you might know the answer, and roll plus intelligence. I asked the following question. Having studied them in battle, what are the Undying up to? I rolled 2d6, added +1 for my intelligence score, and got an 8, which is a mixed success. The rules for this move say, on a 7 to 9, the GM will tell you a vague, twisted, or incomplete truth. Once again, I turned to my perchance oracle for the answer, and got defended refuge. I interpreted that to mean that perhaps the Undying were protecting the web, but that their motives were unclear. Perhaps the answer might lie in the vampire's refuge, the ruins of the Mustang. That took me on to scene 2, with Tatters approaching the Mustang. My scene test indicated that the scene was altered, and the Bluecoats were taking back the streets. My scene test indicated the scene was altered, and the Bluecoats taking back the streets seemed like the obvious change. Tatters then failed an examine move to identify the route to the Mustang, and so I rolled a GM move in response to that failure, and got slow down for a bit. Tatters was stuck, and so it was time to observe the street battle playing out. More oracle rolls gave me a few details of what was going on, such as the garlic gas and the stake throwers. The fiction was telling me that Tatters was stuck, and so her best bet was to use her teleportation magic to reach her goal. But that was not without risk. Here's what the wizard move, Evoke a Spell, says. When you unleash your magical talents, choose a spell you know and roll plus spell. On a 10+, you successfully evoke the spell and its effects come to pass. On a 7 to 9, the spell is still successful, but choose one consequence from the list below. The spell's risk manifests as well. The spell's magic drains you, and you take -1 ongoing to evoke spells until you next settle in, or using it puts you in danger and draws unwanted attention. The GM will explain how. Let's see how well things have worked out for Tatters. She reappears an instant later, emerging from tendrils of clinging purple smoke onto the gently sloping carpet of the Mustang's gaming hall. The wall has been blown out, leaving floatwood beams jutting like ribs from a savaged corpse. She takes in her situation in an instant. Clambering up the exterior wall of the casino are a squad of battle-hardened bluecoats, bristling with military-issue anti-vampire weaponry and bad language. Defending the hall's interior are a score of Nightspawn clinging to the walls and ceiling, bloody fangs bared. And naturally, Tatters has materialized directly between the two opposing forces. There is an instant in which everyone stares at her in astonishment, and then all hell breaks loose. She's off and running, perpendicular to both the blues and the vampires, weaving and dodging as both sides slam into one another. In moments, everything has descended into total chaos. Battle lines fragment into deadly free melee, scored by the shrieks of the dying. Bursting garlic gas canisters reduce visibility to a few feet at best, and Tatters finds herself stumbling blindly into the Mustang's interior, all sense lost of where any of the combatants might be. This is an utter disaster. Even if her hunch is right and Tortimus is somehow allied with the goals of the web, in all this confusion she's as likely to be torn to shreds by a blood-crazed vampire as she is to be shot or beaten to death by a terrified blue. She has to find her way off this killing field. She ducks low behind a roulette table just as a vampire comes crashing over it, locked in a desperate hand-to-hand struggle with a bluecoat constable. Through the thinning gas, she can see the blue is young, barely old enough to shave, close to her own age. From somewhere in the chaos she can hear someone crying out, "Constable Hawksmoor! Constable! Damn it, Nick, where are you?" A gust of wind dissipates the remainder of the gas and the vampire grins, its strength returning. With a casual flick, it knocks the wooden stake from the young bluecoat's hand, and his eyes go wide with fear as the tide of the battle turns decisively against him. The vampire bears down, fangs inches from the boy's neck. The stake clatters to a halt mere inches in front of her, and Tatters knows she has only instants to make her choice. Her fingers close on the stake, still warm from the boy's grip. She can try to save him. Instead, she closes her eyes as the fangs sink in, hot arterial blood spurting from the wound. As his pitiful screams begin and the other bluecoats close in, she takes advantage of the distraction. Doing her best to force down the guilt and the horror, Tatyana Kamadev slips away into the interior of the Mustang, and somewhere deep within her, a demon is laughing. You have been listening to The Lone Adventurer, a solo RPG podcast played, written, and performed by me, Carl White. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider telling your friends about it or leaving a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. It really is a huge help. You can email me at theloneadv@gmail.com or follow my blog at carlillustration.wordpress.com. You can find show notes for this episode and all the others at theloneadventurer.podbean.com, where I include any links mentioned in the episode, as well as mechanics information. I also include a link to a full episode transcript. The story will continue in the next episode of The Lone Adventurer. Thank you for listening.